Welcome back to another episode of the Steel City Sports Podcast. So, if you haven't seen one of these episodes before, they tend to be more of long format discussion type videos. And with us just one day away from the start of the NBA season, I'm going to be doing the seedings for every NBA team. We'll start with the West, then we'll go to the East. This is going to be probably a pretty long video, so strap in here. It's going to be a while. With the NBA season getting kicked off here, I definitely intend to make a lot more NBA-related content on this channel. When I first started Steel City Sports, I actually intended it to be like 50-50 NFL, NBA, and it seems like now this channel has really just become an NFL channel, which I'm fine with. I love talking about football. I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but I also have a lot to say about the NBA as well. So, we're going to start making more NBA content in here with the season starting. So let's just get into the seedings. So like I said, this is going to be me predicting every team, how they're going to fall. We're starting off with the Western Conference. So coming in as the 15th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Portland Trailblazers. Right now, this is a team that is in a total rebuild right now. And while they have a young core that I like, they're just a team that is very, very far away from contention. I do like their young pieces for sure. Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, obviously last year's third overall pick, Scoot Henderson. They drafted Donovan Clingan this year, who I believe was the College Player of the Year. You also have DeAndre Ayton as well. So it's like they have players. They also have Jeremy Grant on a big contract as their vet. So they have players I like, but for me, it kind of feels like a mishmash right now. For me, if I'm running Portland, I would try to sell off Ayton and Jeremy Grant. Although Jeremy Grant is going to be very difficult to move because of the size of his enormous contract. Any of the contending teams that would be interested in a guy like Jeremy Grant are not going to be able to afford him because I think he makes over $30 million a year. And for his skill set, I just don't see how any of the contending teams could be able to afford him. So to me, that contract never really made sense. The only reason you should have given him that contract is if you were planning on keeping Damian Lillard. And I think a couple days after they gave Jeremy Grant that extension, they shipped Damian Lillard off to Milwaukee. So, I think that they moved off Dame a couple years too late. I was campaigning for Damian Lillard to get traded years and years and years ago. Around like 2020 was the first time I was saying, okay, it's time. It's not going to happen in Portland. But they waited another, 3 or 4 years after that to trade Dame away. Like I said, they're just a young core. To me, they feel very far away from contention, but that's all right. Like, you're in a rebuild. It's not terrible for them. They probably want to finish last place in the conference. That way they get the best pick. Chauncey Billups, I don't know how Chauncey Billups has kept his job because he was brought in to Portland to be like this defensive guy and kind of like build up their defense and work with Dame. And now, obviously, Dame's long gone. Their defense has been dreadfully pathetic, even the year that they were trying, because the first year of Chauncey Billups' tenure with the Blazers, they were trying to be a good team, and they still were just terrible on defense. So for me, I don't know why Chauncey's still there. But like we've talked about in the past, like usually, it's not always the case, but typically in the NBA, you get a longer time as a coach to kind of like implement your system and stuff. You usually get at least like 3 or 4 seasons, whereas in the NFL, if you suck in the first year or the second year, owners will fire you immediately. So I think the NBA is a lot more patient with their coaches. So I could see Chauncey being done after this year just because this is going to be another year where I think they're going to win under 20 games and they're just not going to be a good team. But like I said, that's not necessarily a terrible thing because this is a good draft coming up here. They want to get a high pick. At 14, I have the Utah Jazz. They don't have anywhere near as talented a young core as Portland. They have a better player, of course, than Lauri Markkanen. But for me, the Jazz just kind of feel like a directionless team. It feels like every year they start off kind of like competent. They actually seem like maybe this is the year they'll make the playoffs, and then as the year goes on and on, they just fall apart pretty quickly. Usually around All-Star break, the Jazz just kind of fall off a cliff, and I don't see that being any different. I don't know what the Jazz exactly are doing. The fact that Lauri Markkanen is still on this team is kind of a big question mark for me because, he's an all-star level player. He's good. You could get value for him out there, and this team is clearly not good enough to be competing for a playoff spot. So I just don't really know what Danny Ainge is doing here. We know the blueprint of how Danny Ainge likes to run a team. We saw what he did with Boston. He's a very, very conservative GM in terms of making big trades. He likes to build up a stockpile of draft picks, and he did do that with the Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades. But since then, he's done nothing as the GM. They've really made no big move any which way, whether it's trades or signings in the offseason. So for me, if I'm Danny Ainge, I'd be on the phone trying to get rid of Lauri Markkanen because he just doesn't really fit the timeline of this team whatsoever. And unlike Portland, like I said, it's not like they have some great stash of young players. Like Portland, they got a couple young guys that you could look to potentially be the future of the organization. The Utah Jazz don't have that. They don't have like a young star guy going forward. So for me, the plan would be pretty simple. Trade away Lauri, trade away some of their other vets, and try to get a top pick this year because right now, like I said, they feel like a directionless basketball team to me right now. At 13, this might be a controversial placement because they have a top 15 player in the NBA, and I have them this low, but that is the San Antonio Spurs. I get it. Vic is really exciting. I think that I don't want to say like I was higher on Vic than a lot of people because how can you be higher on Victor than most people? He's one of the most hyped up players in the league right now. But I was saying early on in the season last year that, yeah, he looks to me like already a top 15 player in basketball. I don't know if that's like now at this point in time considered controversial, but I do think he's that good. And I think already as a rookie was already the most impactful defender in the entire league. I think he should have won Defensive Player of the Year as a rookie over Gobert. But the rest of the roster is still really bad. I don't care if they added Chris Paul or Harrison Barnes. Like, they're good old vet players to put around Vic, but in terms of being like an overall team to make the playoffs, number one, Greg Popovich just shouldn't be there anymore. His system is completely outdated. And if you really want to know like the truth about Greg Popovich, I would really recommend you to watch Rusty Buckets a couple years back put out a video on Greg Popovich and like how his legacy was really carried by Tim Duncan. And I do believe Pop is kind of overrated because of that. So, if you want to hear more about Greg Popovich and really how he was able to build the dynasty through the back of Tim Duncan, I'd really just search up Rusty Buckets, Greg Popovich, and watch that video. It's pretty long, but it's really good. Rusty Buckets does incredible work. But in terms of the Spurs team, it's just very limited at this point in time. It's still a very young team despite adding Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes. I think they're going to be fun. They're probably going to win some big games. I remember last year where they went toe-to-toe with the Lakers in a big primetime matchup. So they'll be in games. They'll be a fun team to watch. But overall, the depth of this roster is just not there. It's still a very young team. And, it's going to be fun watching Vic throw down lobs from Chris Paul. But I just think overall they're not a very good team. So they're at 13 for me. At 12... Again, this might be another controversial placement. I have the Los Angeles Clippers. I think they're going to be really, really bad for a couple reasons. Number one, Kawhi Leonard's already hurt. I think Kawhi Leonard should be in jail for the amount of money he's stolen for the Clippers. I mean, he is... What an embarrassment that is, really, with Kawhi Leonard. I mean, because the whole point of load management and taking games off is so that he's ready come playoff time. Yet somehow, even though he fucking load manages throughout the entire regular season, he's still always hurt come playoff time. So I'm just over Kawhi. I'm sick of it. I sold all my Clipper stock before last season started. I used to be really high on them, but after all the bullshit, and now you lost Paul George, and I think you can honestly argue Paul George has been the best player for the Clippers over the past couple of years. I know he's been hurt a lot as well, but nowhere near as much as Kawhi. So you lost arguably your most impactful player on the court in Paul George, who was more available than Kawhi. And you're really now relying on a 35, 36-year-old James Harden who's going to be night in, night out, probably your best player with Kawhi sitting on the bench. So it's a really old James Harden, who I still think is a good player, but obviously so far removed from his prime. He's not even an all-star level player at this point in time, I don't think. Still good, though, like can run an offense, but how high of a ceiling does that team have with James Harden at the helm? Kawhi, you're lucky if he plays half the games. I don't even see him playing that because the season hasn't even started, and we're already hearing bullshit about how he's hurt. So the Clippers, to me, just kind of feel like a mess, even though I like Ty Lue a lot. I think they have a good owner in Steve Ballmer. He's aggressive. He's clear that he is not afraid to spend money. Look at that new arena they just built. So the Clippers are always going to have a lot of buzz around them just because of the star names attached to their team, but I just think they're going to be kind of a mess this year with Kawhi being in and out. And Paul George, who was the rock of this team, is now gone. So number 11, I have my team, the Golden State Warriors. I don't think we're going to be very good this year whatsoever. This is probably the worst draw. Not probably. 2020 was pretty bad. So it's like, I'm trying to think. This is arguably the worst roster we've had in the Curry era, at least since like Steph entered his prime. I don't know. I've talked about this a lot, and in like years past, I would talk about the Warriors trying to do like a 2 timeline thing, and how I wish they would just trade all their young assets and try to go all in, because Steph has earned that. Even though Steph is up there in age, he's still in the peak of his prime right now. Like, you look at his numbers, they are still prime Steph Curry numbers in terms of the efficiency, the points, the way he really carries the Warriors offense. So for me, I don't know what to do with this Warriors team. This is a very bad roster. Even though I don't think Klay was that good. I still don't think Klay Thompson's that good in 2024, but losing him definitely did hurt. And I don't really understand I don't really get, like, we talked about it a little when it happened, like the Klay Thompson thing. It's like, I don't really understand what Klay was so pissed about. Like, he felt insulted by the Warriors. He took less money to go to play for Dallas. Like, Klay, you do realize that you were hurt for 2 entire seasons and you were paid max money. The franchise supported you that whole time, paid you a shit ton of money, and then whenever it's time for you to kind of like repay the favor and kind of take a little bit of a discount so the team can kind of stay at least somewhat decent, you get the fucking attitude and you're all pissed off. Like, I don't really understand what that was from Klay. I think this will kind of hurt his legacy a little. Like, Klay on the Mavs, I think, is going to be pretty reminiscent of like Celtic Shaq, because he's just, at this point in time, what is he? Like, he doesn't, like, in Klay Thompson's prime, the thing that made him so sweet, of course, was the shooting. We all know that. Well, he's not even really that good of a shooter anymore. And the other strongest part of his game was his defense. Like, he's a bad defender now. Like, for me, I don't really understand the Klay thing. We'll talk about that more when we get to Dallas. But obviously, he's gone. The team's just not very good. I mean, outside of Steph, you have like Podziemski, Pods, you got Draymond, you got Looney, you got Wiggins. I just don't really know what this team is. I will say this, though. I am pretty pissed at Draymond for the Jordan Poole thing, because I know Jordan Poole obviously is a big meme now, and with the Wizards, really kind of disappointed because he didn't grow into like a true number 1 option and was extremely inefficient with the Wizards. But Jordan Poole, when he was in the Warriors system playing with Steph, was an extremely important piece to this team, and we could really use Jordan Poole right now, because all we got out of Jordan Poole was 1 year of washed Chris Paul. That's all we got in return for a guy looked like he could be the future of this franchise, just based off the 2022 season alone. You look at that season where he was vital. If Jordan Poole wasn't on that Warriors team in 2022, they don't win the title. He was so important to that team, particularly in the playoffs. He was a flamethrower playing alongside Steph. He was really good with the Warriors. And then 2023 was just a weird year overall, because the locker room, they hated each other because of the Draymond shit he pulled where he punched Jordan Poole in the face. Now you have a situation where it's like, I know with the Wizards, it's easy to clown on Jordan Poole, but when he was within the Warrior system and playing with Steph, he was a really important, vital piece to this team, and we really, really miss him right now, especially now with Klay gone. Like, Jordan Poole could have really stepped into that role as like the sidekick for Steph, and that's what he was in the finals run. So I'm really, really pissed at Draymond. He kind of fucked up the future of this organization by doing that. And of course, they were going to side with Draymond in that instance because he's been there. He's been such a vital piece of the dynasty. But, wow, I mean, that was so unbelievably stupid what Draymond Green did there. And now this is, despite having still a top 10 player in Steph Curry, they're just a directionless team, kind of like some of the other teams we just talked about, because the rest of this roster is a fucking joke. I like some of the pieces. I like Pods. I like Kevon Looney in certain spots. Draymond's still a really good defender. Wiggins, we don't really know, because he was awesome in 22. He was an all-star starter. 23, what I like 23-24, like since the title, what has Andrew Wiggins really done? Nothing. So I just don't know. I really don't know what to do with this Warriors team. It's very frustrating as of this point in time. But looking back on, them winning the 4 titles in 8 years, I can't really complain that much. It's kind of like the Patriots fans now, like bitching and moaning about how bad their team is. Like, guys, you dominated the league for 2 decades. You can't really be that upset. So, yeah, it sucks now, but I'm a Warriors fan for life. I don't really care what happens going forward. Always stick by them. Let's move on now to number 10 is a really scrappy team is the Houston Rockets, who I could honestly even be underrating a little because I'm going to be honest with you guys. Not like I was watching a ton of Houston Rockets games last year, but they're a really scrappy team. They almost made it to the play-in last year, and they have a really nice young core of players. They just signed Jalen Green to a 3-year extension worth $100 million. Congrats to him. They got Alperen Sengun. A lot of people are predicting could be an all-star this year, so watch out for him. You have Jabari Smith Jr., a former top 3 pick, who is a very versatile type player, can do a lot on the floor, and I'm a really big fan of Jabari. You got Fred VanVleet, even though I think he's on one of the most grossly inflated contracts in the league. Does fit this team very well in terms of like the culture that Udoka is trying to establish there, and like gritty, defensive. And I think I've said like all their key core players. But yeah, it's a good team, but it's just the West is so bloated with talent that, if you put this Rockets team in the East, I think there's a realistic shot they actually do get into the top 8 and make the playoffs. But in the West, I think they just come up a little short because they still just don't have that number 1 true established guy. Maybe Sengun will take that step this year. Maybe Jalen Green will take that step. We've seen flashes where Jalen Green looked incredible, like where he was playing at a legit high-level all-star level of play. But the problem with Jalen Green is his inconsistency, is he'll go on these terrible cold streaks, and then he'll go on crazy hot streaks. I'd like to see that for Jalen Green, where he's just able to consistently string together good games. And, of course, Sengun is kind of similar to that. So Houston, it really comes down to, are their young stars going to develop into consistent, true all-star level players? I think Udoka's a really good coach. He brings that defensive culture. They're going to be a scrappy team, a team you don't want to match up against all the time because they're young, they play fast, they play good defense, but the inconsistency for me is why they're not higher. Number 9, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. Here's the weird part about the Lakers. It's like I feel like if you would have asked Lakers fans in years prior, I'm talking about before last season, hey, what's been the biggest problem with the Lakers? How come you guys haven't been such a good team? In 21 and 22, what has been the problem? I think a lot of people would have told you Anthony Davis's availability. He's been hurt a lot, and if we could just get a real healthy season of Anthony Davis, then we'd be fine. We would be a good team. Well, that's kind of the problem, though, because you got probably the healthiest season of Anthony Davis since he's been a Laker last year, and they still were a first-round playoff exit. So I kind of view that as what the Lakers are. LeBron is going to be 40 years old in December. Anthony Davis, when healthy, is still a top 10 player in the league, but I still feel like Anthony Davis should be a top 3 player. I think he has the talent to do that. We've always questioned this with Anthony Davis is, does he have that drive? Does he have that motor? Does he want to be a top 3 player? I don't really think he does, but he has the talent to be a top 10 player. And he does have some consistency issues as well. I feel like every 1 out of 3 games, Anthony Davis just kind of takes off in terms of his effort. But when he's on, he's incredible. Outside of that great duo, though, this roster is really a mess. Austin Reeves, wildly inconsistent. D'Angelo Russell, again, another one of the most inconsistent players in the entire league. He'll go on incredible, great, hot streaks from behind the arc, and then you'll turn around and he's 0 for 5 in a playoff game and getting benched in crucial moments. That's just kind of what D'Angelo Russell is. You got some other decent wings like Vanderbilt and Hachimura, but it just feels like a mishmash, wildly streaky, way too reliant on a 40-year-old, and I don't know what to think of J.J. Redick as head coach. I said this when he got hired at the time. kind of felt like a bit of a desperation move to me. It reminded me a lot of whenever the Brooklyn Nets hired Steve Nash to be their coach, because Steve Nash had never had any experience as a head coach on any level, not high school, not college, not NBA as a head coach. But he was buddies with KD. So they're like, hey, sure, you want that, Kevin? Sure, you can have that. And it was a disaster. Steve Nash didn't know what the fuck he was doing as a head coach. I think JJ Redick is, just from listening to his podcast and stuff like that, I think that he has a better shot to succeed than Steve Nash. But it does remind me a lot of that situation where he's never been a coach. He's buddies with the star player. So they're like, here you go. Let's give it a shot. I could see it imploding really quick. And of course, Bronny. I don't want to talk about Bronny too much because I feel like it's really been beaten to death. Whichever side you land on Bronny, I've seen multiple videos breaking down how he's like legitimately the worst player he was the worst player in the Summer League, not named Alex Sarr. He was the worst player in the preseason. And there's a good chance he starts just because Bron wants that. So that has disaster written all over it. I just don't know with the Lakers. The Lakers, like, the best comparison is the Cowboys. Like, a lot of flash, a lot of buzz around them. They're the biggest brand in their league. But when it comes to the big moments, the big games, don't really trust them because they're just too limited. Let's move on now to the teams I have being playoff teams this year. So starting off at 8, we have the Phoenix Suns. It's really sad what Kevin Durant, like, his career has become, because when he was obviously with the Thunder, he was regarded as like a top 2 player, only behind LeBron. Like, he was incredible. Everybody gave him the respect he had. Like, they had made conference finals runs. They got to a finals. Then he goes to the Warriors, takes a lot of shit, but was the best player on the best team of all time and won back-to-back titles, destroyed LeBron in back-to-back finals, outplayed him in 2017, that finals. Then he gets all scared because, like, the media saying, oh, his legacy is tarnished because these rings don't matter. And what has his legacy been since he's left the Warriors? It's been a dysfunctional mess. I made a video about this a while back. Maybe we'll have to revisit it because it really needs to be studied, like the generational downfall of Kevin Durant's career, the trajectory he was on with the Warriors to be legitimately one of the best players ever. Like, I think if KD had stayed with the Warriors, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a Warriors fan, I'm just saying it from an objective standpoint, they'd have like 5 rings, when you just go back and look at who won each year. Like, 2020, obviously you take that out because KD missed the whole year and Klay was out that whole year, but then you go forward. 2021, if you would add KD to that Warriors team, they're at least getting to the finals. I think that they would have crushed that Phoenix Suns team pretty easily. 2022, they won the title. So if you added KD to the mix, I don't think that would really change it. If not, they'd be a more dominant team. 2023, they had beat that Nuggets team already the prior year. I know they had a lot of injuries, but that Warriors team had already beaten the Nuggets without Kevin Durant. So if he was on that team, and last year, for sure, with how KD played in the playoffs outside of that final game, KD was still really consistently good in the playoffs for them last year. So I think there's a realistic argument right now. Kevin Durant would have 4 or 5 rings if he would have stayed with the Warriors, and now he has 2. People really undervalue his rings, and it's been a fucking mess wherever he's gone since then. Like the Nets, he completely cratered that franchise. I don't really understand how, if you're a Nets fan, you could like Kevin Durant after what he did to your team, because literally everything was catered to Kevin Durant. He got the coach he wanted. He got the players he wanted to play with. Every move the organization made had to get the okay from Kevin Durant. And guess what? Not even like 3 years into his tenure with the team, he still turned around and gave you a giant middle finger and said, fuck you, trade me. After you cater to his every need. So he fucking cratered an entire organization with the Brooklyn Nets, set them back probably another decade. And now that he's with the Suns, they kind of feel irrelevant. They really do. Like, there's no one out there that thinks the Suns are a legit title contender, myself included. Bradley Beal, arguably on one of the worst contracts in the NBA, was a fucking embarrassment against the Timberwolves in the playoffs. So, and then the rest of the team is just a thrown together mash of random role players. Doesn't really feel like a team. Just feels like a bunch of guys out there. So it really comes down to KD and Book. And that is not a winning recipe. When you look at like the teams that have won the titles the past couple of years, they played team basketball, like the Celtics. They got 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that are legit good players in the NBA. The Denver Nuggets the year before, one of the best starting fives we've seen in a while in terms of just how they complemented each other. They got great support from their bench as well. And you compare those teams to the Suns team, it's basically the exact polar opposite of that. They have no depth. They have old stars and Beal and KD. Book is still in the prime of his career. It's just frustrating, like I said, like to see Kevin Durant kind of just fade away into irrelevancy. It's really a shame for a guy. I still view Kevin Durant as he's in his prime. Like a lot of people might think that that's crazy, but if you just go and look at his numbers from last year, statistically, Kevin Durant on the Suns last year, still in his prime. Like he's still putting up 27 a night on incredible shooting efficiency. He's still one of the most unguardable anomalies in the NBA right now, but the Suns are just such a disaster around him that people just don't like whatever. Like I'm starting to see lists now where people don't even have KD in the top 10. Like that's how ridiculous it's getting. Like KD is still one of the greatest players in the league right now. It's just his situation is such a mess. The Suns feel so irrelevant that what do you do? Like, I just don't know. So, like I said, I'll probably make a video about that soon, about how Kevin Durant kind of ruined his legacy in, like, the later part of his career. But this is best case scenario, I think, for the Suns, is being the 8th seed and probably getting swept again. Because, you know, if you would have said last year the Suns, after all the hype of bringing in their quote-unquote big three after getting Beal, if you would have said before that season the Suns are going to be a first-round playoff exit and they don't have any major injuries, like that was viewed as a catastrophe. But they didn't only lose in the first round. They got fucking swept in the first round. That is such an unbelievable embarrassment. And they're running back that same exact team. I know they made a change at head coach. They fired Frank Vogel for Mike Budenholzer. That doesn't change anything in my opinion. So the Suns, this is kind of what they are. They're going to get, I think, a little more buzz just because they have KD, they have Book, they have Beal, but at the end of the day, they're just not a very good basketball team. They got swept in the first round of the playoffs last year. They're a mess, in my opinion. Number 7, I have the Sacramento Kings. Really interested to see how DeMar kind of fits into this team because, you know, the duo of Fox and Sabonis has really been criminally underrated. They've been one of the best duos in the league since they formed, but you know, there's so many great duos in the league now that I feel like they kind of get underlooked. The fact that none of them made an all-star team last year was completely a joke. And people kind of like don't realize how good Sabonis is. Like he just had one of the best big men season of all time last year with how versatile he was. There was a point, like a good chunk of last year's season. I don't know if he finished this, but there was a large part of the season where Sabonis was in top 5 for MVP voting. Like, Sabonis was really good last year. Fox was really good last year. I like their supporting pieces as well with Keegan Murray and Malik Monk. Even Keon Ellis came along as well towards the end of the season as a defender for sure. So I like a lot about this team. I just have kind of a little bit of a question mark with how does DeMar DeRozan fit in this team, because everywhere DeMar's gone in his career, when he was Toronto, when he was in San Antonio, when he was in Chicago, DeMar was the guy. He had the ball in his hand the entire game. He was running the team. He was the guy on his team. So it's going to be interesting to see how DeMar fits into this team where he is unquestionably the number 3 option on the team. And given on a night-on-night basis how Keegan Murray's playing, he could be the 4th option on the team. So I don't know how DeMar's going to fit into that role because it's not like he's a great jump shooter. It's not like he's a great defender. So it's like when DeMar doesn't have the ball in his hands, what exactly is DeMar doing? So I think that it's going to work out at the end of the day because I think DeMar is a high IQ guy. I think that he does kind of provide that veteran scoring to the Kings, which they were really missing in that first-round matchup against the Thunder. Like, they just needed another scorer on their team. So DeMar will definitely provide that. I just have kind of some question marks in terms of their spacing and the fit. So they're a very intriguing team to me for sure because of that acquisition. Moving into number 6, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. To me, they objectively got worse this offseason, trading away Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. I think it's one of the worst trades in recent memory. Karl Anthony Towns just objectively does everything better on a basketball floor than Julius Randle does. He's better in every single aspect you could think of. And arguably the best shooting big man of all time, added a dimension to this offense that is going to be sorely missed. The spacing on this team, I think, is going to be atrocious because you're going to have Conley at the 1 and at the 2, Daniels at the 3, or I think they traded him. I don't know who the 3 is. Let me know in the comments. Randall at the 4 and Gobert at the 5. That is, ugh. That is just yucky spacing. To me, the move makes absolutely zero sense. Like, you just made it to the conference final. Your team just beat the favorite last year. In the playoffs last year, the Denver Nuggets were the favorite. They were either the favorite or the second favorite behind Boston. But either way, they were the favorite in the West, and they just won the fucking title the year prior. Your team just beat that team and got to the conference final. You were a couple games away from going to the NBA Finals. You know, you could argue it's the best year in the entire history of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And instead of running that team back with Ant another year better, they trade away Karl-Anthony Towns, the second most important guy on their team. You guys have heard my rants about Rudy Gobert in the past. I think he's legitimately the most overrated player in the history of basketball. The fact that man has 4 Defensive Player of the Years is a fucking disgrace to the award and to the league, because anytime Rudy Gobert has gotten to the playoffs, not anytime, but a lot of the times, particularly with the Jazz, he was the reason on defense why they were losing games. You cannot be a Defensive Player of the Year and be the reason why your team is losing because of how fucking bad you are at perimeter defense. Good coaches would scheme up so that Rudy Gobert would get switched on to someone on the perimeter, and they just exploit that because he can't fucking play perimeter defense. So I don't give a fuck if he's really tall and plays great rim protection defense. Like, he is a terrible perimeter defender and such a liability at that it has single-handedly costed his team's playoff series. He's been the reason usually why his team loses playoff series, because he's such a liability on perimeter defense. I'm particularly, like, if you want to know a big specific one, go look at the 2021 playoffs. He was still on the Jazz. It was him and Donovan's last year with the Jazz, and they played the Clippers. The Clippers completely exposed Rudy Gobert because Tyronn Lue is a good coach and knows what the fuck he's doing. Completely embarrassed Rudy Gobert. Like, I think Terrence Mann had like a 50-point game in there because they were just having Rudy Gobert switch onto him on the perimeter. He was wide open on every shot attempt. So I think Gobert sucks. I think he's the most overrated player in the history of the NBA. Julius Randle, we've seen 2 times him get to the playoffs as like this version of himself where he is the man. Obviously in 21 with the Knicks, he was the lead guy on the Knicks team. He was really, really bad. And I don't knock him too much for that just because, you know, like I said, it was his first time in the playoffs. He was really their only real offensive creator on that team. Like, you had Derrick Rose, I guess, but it's like he was the guy really on offense for that Knicks team in 2021. They were a real defensive team. That was their entire identity. So I don't knock him too much for struggling in that playoff series against Atlanta. But in 23, he was the sidekick to Brunson, and he was terrible in that. So really bad playoff performer. And I like Dante DiVincenzo a lot, but he's not good enough to make up the gap between Cat and Julius Randle. So for me, that is just an absolute embarrassment of a trade. Like, it'd be one thing if this team wasn't really working out after the Gobert trade, and it's like they missed the playoffs last year, they don't really have a direction. They just made the fucking conference final. They were one of the best teams last year. There was absolutely no fucking point to do this at all. So I still have the Timberwolves at 6 because I like Anthony Edwards that much. I think he's good enough to win you that many games on his own. But come playoff time, I don't trust this team whatsoever, just because you're going to be relying on Julius Randle as your number 2 option. Historically terrible playoff performer. Rudy Gobert is a negative to me in the playoffs. It's just, I don't know what to do with this team. Number 5, we have a team a lot of people forgot about, the Memphis Grizzlies. They're going to be back. Ja Morant is electrifying. He is a stud, and he's going to be back. Even, like, I think he only played like 3 or 4 games because he came back off suspension, then got hurt really quick after coming back. But even in those couple games last year where he was back, he showed you how good he was. Like, he was immediately impactful, immediately winning them games. People forget, because of all the bullshit, his suspension, all that, people forget just how good Ja Morant is. Like, Ja Morant, when fully healthy, is a legit top 10 player in this league, and there's still a really good supporting cast around him. Like, I don't really take a whole lot from the Grizzlies last year. That's not who their team is. They dealt with injuries. They dealt with Ja being gone. Like, Desmond Bane missed a lot of time. Jaren Jackson missed time as well. Like, this is still a really good basketball team. Ja, Bane, Jaren Jackson, and I still think Taylor Jenkins is a really good head coach as well, because when you go back to 2022, when Ja was out, they were still a really good team, and that really comes down to coaching. They made it to the second round of the playoffs that year. So I have a lot of faith in this Grizzlies team. I think Ja is going to have his big revenge tour, and they're going to be one of the most electrifying teams in the league because of Ja. Next up at number 4, this might be like my big controversial, shocking pick. I have the New Orleans Pelicans at number 4. I really, really, really like the DeJounte Murray trade for them. It really provides them like a true, legit playmaker at the point guard position, something that they were lacking for years now. I've never liked C.J. McCollum at the point guard position. I know he had a good regular season last year, but come playoffs, C.J. McCollum was a fucking embarrassment for this Pelicans team, completely let them down, was terrible in the playing games, was terrible against OKC. So I just, I'm not a big fan of C.J. McCollum. It's not that, like, as a guy, I hate him. I just think his play style is weird. For me, I think he'd be best served in a role as, like, a six-man, like an off-the-bench, spark plug, microwave type player. Because DeJounte, I think he's going to get back to what we saw with the Spurs, because the fit with DeJounte and Trae Young was just weird. It never worked out. So now DeJounte can just go back to being the lead guard playmaker. And it's going to be really fun to watch him and Zion together, and you still have a really strong core around Zion, a lot of depth with the wings and the guards. It's still kind of a younger team, but I think they have great depth. I'm still a big fan of Willie Green. I think he's still one of the most underrated head coaches in the league. I always point back to his first year in the NBA as a head coach with the Pelicans. Like, I don't think people give him credit for how impressive of a job he did that season, because I think the Pelicans started off like 3-15, or it was something that fucking bad. Most teams would just give up on the season and be like, whatever, we don't have a shot. But he was able to lead them back into making the playoffs, where they actually gave the one-seeded Suns a lot of trouble in the playoffs. So I still think Willie Green's a really good coach. I think it'd be a big mistake to fire him. And of course, it's always going to come down to Zion with this team. If Zion can stay healthy, they're an elite team. We've seen it time after time. When Zion plays, he's an all-star level player. He's really just a great player when he plays. And I go specifically, like recently, to the play-in game against the Lakers. They would have won that game against the Lakers if Zion would have stayed healthy. He had 40 points. He was controlling the game on both sides of the court, offense and defense. But he got hurt, and they lost. So it's always going to come down to that for the Pelicans. I could not imagine being a Pelicans fan, how frustrating it must be, because when healthy, when you have Zion on the floor, you are an elite team. Just he's gone so often. So it's kind of a risk me putting them at 4, but I just think of them that highly. Even when Zion's out, they're still a pretty good team, especially with adding DeJounte Murray for a mop handle and a box of popcorn. So I like this team a lot. I really do. They're deep. They're versatile. They have the star, Zion, when he's healthy. They still have Brandon Ingram, one of the best scorers in the league. So I do think very highly of this Pelicans team. I just really, 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 really hope Zion's healthy. Number 3, we have the reigning Western Conference champions, the Dallas Mavericks. So I mean, as long as Kyrie plays like he did in the regular season last year, I mean, he is the perfect Robin. He was that with LeBron, and now he's that with Luka. He's just the perfect fit with this team, the perfect fit alongside Luka. And I thought it was going to be like impossible to find Luka a second guy, just because of how unique his play style is, how all-encompassing it is. Like, he literally just runs the team. He's the offense. He's their entire offense. Like, passing the ball, being a great playmaker, and of course shooting. Everything Luka does. I thought it was going to be so hard to find a guy to complement him. But Kyrie has been perfect in that role. I mean, he has really been sensational and was incredible for them in the playoffs up until the finals, where he just didn't show up. Kyrie Irving was an embarrassment in the finals. I'm not going to forget about that, because Luka showed up, but Kyrie didn't. And I don't think they could have won that series, but it would have went a lot longer if Kyrie would have remembered how to play basketball. He was just objectively bad in the finals. But of course, like I said earlier, they did add Klay Thompson. I don't know how much Klay changes this team because, like I said, when you look at Klay objectively, he's just not a very good NBA player at this point in time. His shooting is way off. He's nowhere near the shooter he once was. He doesn't bring anything defensively. So I get it. It's a big name. It's exciting to see Klay on a new team, but I just don't really know if he changes the ceiling for this team a whole lot. Like, he's going to have nights where he gets hot and he nails 5 threes in a row. But most of the nights, he's going to struggle. You know, he just doesn't really have that athleticism. He never was like an incredible athlete, but he had great defensive versatility. That's gone. I just don't know what to do with Klay. Klay, it's really going to come down to, I got to see it first. I got to see what Klay is now with the Mavericks. Obviously, this is first time not playing with Steph, so it's going to be really interesting to see how he fits in with Luka and Kyrie and their other guys. But Luka and Kyrie, one of the best duos in the league. Derek Lively, an incredible addition as the rookie last year. He's going to be better. I didn't like the fact they lost Derek Jones Jr. I thought that was a big-time mistake because he was pretty important for them last year. He's just gone now. Don't love that, and they replaced him with Klay. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know about Klay, but I do know about Luka and Kyrie. They just led this team to the finals. I think Dallas is going to be really good. Number 2, I have the Denver Nuggets. Now, I think the KCP loss is going to really hurt them down the stretch, particularly in the playoffs. But in terms of like a regular season team, like Nikola Jokic is objectively one of the best players in the history of the game. Like last year in December, I made a top 25 players of all time list. I think that needs to be updated now because Jokic is 100% a top 25 player of all time now. He has 3 MVPs. He has a finals MVP. He's objectively one of the best players of all time. So anytime you have that guy in the peak of his prime, you are going to be a dominant team. And they still have a great supporting cast around Nikola Jokic. Murray's still there. Porter's still there. Gordon is still there. So it sucks to lose KCP. I think it really will hurt down the stretch. They're going to miss his shooting and spacing and defense. But in terms of the regular season, they're going to be a top seed. It's going to be weird to see him play with Westbrook, too. I'm really kind of interested to see that. But they're going to be a really good team. I mean, Nikola Jokic is arguably the best player in basketball. I put Luka over him after last year. After I ranked, after every season I ranked the players in the NBA, I had Luka at 1. I think Luka had honestly a really strong case for MVP last year. But Jokic, if you say he's the best player on the planet, I'm not going to argue with you. Number 1, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were the 1 seed last year. I think they continue that again this year because they're an extremely young team. I think they were the youngest team to make the playoffs last year, and they were a 1 seed. So all their good players are young and ascending. Their players are just going to be 1 year better. SGA, J-Dub, Chet Holmgren, of course. They added Caruso as well, which is really going to help out. They also added Isaiah Hartenstein, really underrated big man. They also, they still have Dort. It's just a very deep team with a lot of guys with different versatile skill sets. And SGA, to me, should have won MVP. Like I said, Luka had a good case as well, but for me, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should have been the MVP last year. He led the youngest team to make the playoffs to the 1 seed and was the most consistent scorer in the NBA last year. He had the most 30-point games. He was incredible last year. I don't really know how he didn't win MVP. He's my favorite to win that this year. I think it's really going to come down to either him or Luka. Like at some point, Luka has to win an MVP, so he's in there. But SGA's right there for me as well. So that has been my seeding prediction for the West. I have no idea what time we're at right now. We're probably over half an hour. But let's get into the East. Let's just jump right on into the Eastern Conference. So at 15, I have the Detroit Pistons. What can you say about this team? I mean, there is absolutely no silver lining. Even though I like Cade Cunningham, he's not good enough on his own to carry this team to anything relevant. Like the Detroit Pistons last year were historically one of the worst basketball teams in the history of the league. They were on pace at one point to legitimately be the worst team ever. So there's just not a whole lot here for me to look forward to. I like Cade Cunningham, but that's it. I like Jalen Duren as well. I mean, he's fine. But this team is just kind of a mess right now. I don't really know what J.B. Bickerstaff brings to the table. Like, I liked him his first year in Cleveland, but He's not really a big ceiling raiser for me, especially with a team that's so limited from a talent perspective. They've really missed on some draft picks, particularly Killian Hayes, who isn't even in the NBA anymore. Jaden Ivey as well had a very disappointing start to his career the first 2 seasons. So I just don't know with Detroit. I mean, they went pretty quickly from a team that I looked at as like one of the highest like potentials, one of the best futures going forward, and now they're just a fucking dumpster fire. I just don't know what to make of Detroit, and I don't think it's going to change this year. At 14, I have the Wizards. They were just pretty much just as bad as the Pistons were last year as well. They only won like 3 more games than Detroit last year, so the Wizards, they're also a mess. Jordan Poole really disappointed as a number 1 option. I thought he was going to really thrive as like the guy on his team, like having his own team, being the guy. He was not very good. Like, he scored, I think, 19 a night, but it was on god-awful efficiency. We know he brings nothing defensively. He's really just kind of become a meme now. Alex Sarr, I mean, would have been exciting because, you know, he was the number 1 prospect for a large part of last year, but he was statistically the worst player in Summer League and was terrible in the preseason. So I don't know what to think of Alex Sarr. I mean, just his stock looks really, really bad right now. Kyle Kuzma, like, there's just not a lot to like about this Wizards team. They just feel like another team that feels directionless. 13, I have the Brooklyn Nets. So we talked about this a little bit earlier with KD, like how he really cratered this team. There's like nothing there with this team. Like, I really, really feel bad for the Nets. Obviously, like in 2013, they cashed in all their assets to get Pierce and Garnett and go all in. They won 1 playoff series as a result of that. Then they did this same exact thing with KD, Harden, and Kyrie. They won 1 playoff series. Or did they win? Yeah, they won 1. They beat the Celtics the first round in 2021. That was it. They've self-imploded. All of their big 3 members are gone now. All their picks are gone. Their best player is Nick Claxton. You know, I like Nick Claxton, but you put him on like any of the contending teams, I don't even know if he starts. So I really, really feel for the Brooklyn Nets because, you know, if you're the Nets and you have KD and you have Kyrie and you have a chance to trade for James Harden in his prime, how do you say no to that? Like, I do not knock the Nets whatsoever. I think people who do, looking back, it's complete hindsight. You know, hindsight is 20/20. So people who knock the Nets for doing that, I think, are really foolish because any GM in the NBA, if they had the chance to trade for James Harden at that point in time, they would have done it because he was still at an MVP level. Before he got the hamstring injury, even if he arrived, I mean, when he arrived in Brooklyn, he was still playing at an MVP level. People forget that. James Harden was really good with the Nets when he first got there. Then he got the hamstring injury. They imploded, and they've been a mess ever since. It's really, really a sad tale because they should have dominated the league, but now look at their team. It really is a shame. They just don't have really anything redeeming about their team whatsoever. They're just they're mid personified. They're not even mid, they're just bad. So at number 12, I have the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, they just lost DeMar. They weren't very good with DeMar, so taking off your best scorer, what are they? Again, another directionless team to me. I think Billy Donovan could definitely be fired this year. They're just going to be bad. They're going to be really, really bad yet again. The Bulls are another team that I have a lot of sympathy for because before Lonzo Ball got hurt, you go back to that season, the 2021-22 season, the Bulls for like half the season were the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. People kind of forget that. Like, when Lonzo was there, he was an incredible fit. Like, you could not ask for a better fit between Lonzo and LaVine and DeRozan and Vucevic and Pat Williams. Like, they looked like a really, really good team. Then it all fell apart when Lonzo got hurt. Like, the offense was nowhere near as fast-paced. It wasn't as dynamic. They lost in the first round that year, and they've been kind of a mess ever since. I think Lonzo's going to play now this year. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but there's been rumblings about Lonzo maybe returning. It's not going to make much of a difference now because, you know, he was a great passer. His shooting had come along, but now we're, 2 or 3 years removed from that. He's off one of the most gruesome injuries. DeMar's gone. Vucevic is a negative asset. LaVine is kind of what he is at this point in time. They're just a very, very low ceiling team, in my opinion. It really is sad because, like, they had the chance to be a really good team that could make some noise in the playoffs and just very, very quickly went away. So number 11, I have the Charlotte Hornets. I like this team on paper. Like LaMelo Ball, if he's healthy, is a really good player, was an all-star already. He's a great playmaker. He's a great shooter. Brandon Miller was an incredible rookie. He brings a great versatile skill set, so I like that pairing. But outside of those two, there's just not a whole lot on this roster. You got like Miles Bridges is all right, I guess. Mark Williams at center is okay, but it's just a very mid roster. And LaMelo is similar to Zion in terms of his injuries. Like, he's just never healthy. So I just think, like, it's very hard to trust LaMelo to stay healthy. It's very hard to trust the Hornets. They're just not a very well-run team. I don't know what to make of the Hornets because this deep into LaMelo's tenure, I thought they would have made a playoff team or a playoff berth just based on how good he looked as a rookie. And if he would have kept growing off of that, I thought they'd be at least a competent, team in the East, make a couple playoff berths, maybe win a playoff series here or there. But it's just gone basically the exact opposite of that. They have not grown as a team since LaMelo's gotten there, and I just don't know what they're going to do. Because even though they got Brandon Miller, who I like, the team outside of those two is a kind of a mess. It's still a mess. They've sold off their veterans. Like, obviously, Gordon Hayward isn't even in the NBA anymore. Terry Rozier's gone. I don't know what to make with Charlotte. They're another really frustrating team. Number 10, I have the Toronto Raptors. I do give them credit for sure for like embracing their kind of rebuild, because having three guys on their team that basically played the same not exactly, but like similar play styles in terms of OG, Scotty, and Pascal. So I do give them credit for moving off OG and Pascal, getting assets for those guys. But it's going to take a little while for them to get back into like relevancy because it's still a limited roster with younger players. I like RJ Barrett. He's fine. I like Emmanuel Quickley. He's fine. Obviously, Scotty's made an all-star team. Maybe he's been a two-time. I can't remember. Was last year his first time on the all-star team? I don't know. But I like Scotty. To me, he doesn't feel good enough to be like a franchise building block guy, like with what Paolo's become or obviously Wemby, like some of the other really highly drafted guys the past couple years. I don't view Scotty in that tier whatsoever, but it feels like the Raptors kind of feel like he's that guy, like he's going to blossom into a superstar. I think he kind of is what he is. He's a good player. I think he's more of a complementary piece, though, than a lead guy. But, that's fine. Like I said, I do give them credit for embracing their rebuild. I'd rather them do that than try to be like a mediocre, maybe we'll squeak into the play-in. I don't know. But, yeah, that's just kind of how I feel about them. Number 9, I have the Atlanta Hawks, another really frustrating team. 2021, they made the conference finals. Since then, they've been nothing but an utter disappointment. The past couple years, the DeJounte thing did not work out whatsoever. There's a good chance Quinn Snyder could be fired now. They'd be on to another coach. They do have the number 1 overall pick this year, Rhea Shea. I don't know anything about him. This is the first time where I legitimately know nothing about a number 1 overall pick. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. Rhea Shea. I don't know. So I've heard guys, like people that I trust with like draft analysis, like Pierre on Numbers on the Board. Again, another great content creator. I would definitely recommend you go subscribe to Pee Wee the Plug on YouTube because he does incredible analysis videos, knows more basketball than I could ever know. And I was watching, like, after the draft, I was watching his draft breakdown. He was like, before this season started, no one would have had him going number 1 overall. Like, he was viewed as like a mid-first-rounder pick. It's just the amount of talent. Like, it's such a depleted draft in terms of not a lot of high-end draft not in terms of like the talent, the upside. There just wasn't a whole lot of good prospects, so he just turned out to be the number 1 pick. And this is now like me. I'm saying that like this is probably the worst draft class we've seen in 20 years. So I don't know what to make of Rhea Shea. I don't know if he's going to change their trajectory or not. I like Trae Young. I think Trae Young is actually pretty underrated because like him by himself, it keeps Atlanta as like a competent offense, but their defense is so criminally bad that they're just not good enough. And like they've had years prior where they've been like a top 5 offense, but their defense is so fucking terrible that they just are a mediocre team. So we'll see. But I think it's just going to be another disappointing year, and we could see probably quickly Trae Young be on a new team. Number 8, I have the Miami Heat. They don't care about the regular season. I do think that they have a good ceiling, of course. We've seen them make the finals 2 of the past, 4 or 5 years now. They made the finals in 2023. I just don't know what the Heat are really frustrating me because, like, they just don't give a shit about the regular season. And then that kind of, like, turns out to bite them in the ass because come playoffs, like, you have to play, like, the best teams in the first round. Like, last year, they had to play Boston in the first round. They were gone. Even if Jimmy was healthy, I don't think there's no way they would have beat that Celtics team last year. So it's frustrating to me. I wish they would take the regular season a little seriously. They'd have a much easier path on them for the regular season. This is, I think, from a talent perspective, at least their starting 5. You could argue this is the best it's been in the Jimmy Butler era. You know, you got Rozier at the 1, Hero at the 2, Jimmy at the 3, Jaquez at the 4, and Bam at the 5. That's a really good starting 5, but like I said, they just don't really care about the regular season. So that's why I got them at 8. At 7, we have the Orlando Magic. They were the 5 seed last year. They got to a Game 7 with the Cavs in the first round. And they added KCP. I think KCP is a really underrated signing because he provides to this Magic team literally exactly what they needed. If you watched that Cavs Magic series, which I watched basically every game because it was always the first game on, and I could just watch it on the TV at work. I'd watch the whole game. The number one thing for the Magic they were lacking in that playoff series was three-point creation. They had absolutely no three-point creation whatsoever. I think it was like Game 1 or Game 2. They were like 5 of 30 from behind the arc. Like, it was really bad. It was the reason they lost. And outside of Paolo, they just didn't have a reliable scorer. Franz was really bad in the playoffs. So adding KCP, I think, is really, really going to help this young Magic team provide that veteran leadership. He has won titles. He's a very versatile type player, so that's a big signing for me. And then you got Paolo. I think Paolo is one of the most underrated players in the league right now. He's incredible. Like, he's a legit, true number 1 option in the NBA right now, and he's still so young. He's so young, and he's already so good. So I think the Magic, they're a good team. They just, for me, they feel like they're one piece away for, just adding one more, like, reliable, trusty scorer to be, like, an actual contending team. But they should be a team making the playoffs every year Paolo's healthy, because he's that good. They have a good cast around him. Number 6, I have the Indiana Pacers. Really liked the acquisition of Pascal because they didn't really have to give much up to get Pascal. They signed him up long term, so I like the fact that they added another, like, veteran scorer. It just fits really well alongside the team because of his versatility. So I like that big 3 of Tyrese, Pascal, Miles Turner. I really, really like that front court defensively in terms of the versatility. And Tyrese Halliburton to start off the year was an MVP candidate. The first half of last year, like, he was without question a top 10 player in the league. And then, of course, like, after the All-Star break, just wasn't quite the same, came a little bit back down to earth. But we know Tyrese is in contention every year to be the best passer in the league. Gives you 20 a night. Really, really good high-end player leading this young Pacers team with Pascal now there. They're going to be a problem if they're able to stay, like, fully healthy. They just made it to the conference finals, which is kind of crazy to think that they did that. Because on paper, like, it's a good team, but you wouldn't think it's good enough to get to the conference final. They just did that. Now, we did have a conversation of, is it the worst team ever to make a conference final? And I do think since I've been watching since the 2016-17 season, so this will be my 8th season watching the NBA. That was definitely the worst team I've ever seen make a conference final run ever. But they did make it, so you still got to give them credit for that. Number 5, I have the Cleveland Cavaliers. This kind of is their ceiling. Like, this is what the Cavs are for me. I don't think they're going to, like, have a very different outcome than what happened last year. They were a good regular season team. They pulled it out by the, very narrow margin. They won the first round playoff matchup, and they lost in the second round. I know Donovan got hurt, but they weren't beating the Celtics with Donovan. So that's what the Cavs are to me at this point in time, which is fine. Like, a lot of teams in the NBA would give anything to be in the spot the Cavs are in, to be a competent team, a good regular season team, usually win a playoff series, and then you're out by the second round. But for the Cavs, it's like if you want to raise your ceiling, you got to make some changes to this team. To me, I like Garland and Mitchell both a lot as players, but their skills do overlap a lot. To me, like I would have moved off Garland and I would play Donovan at the 1, have him just be the guy. Because, you remember back to Donovan's first year in Cleveland when Garland was hurt, Donovan was playing the point guard position. He was in the MVP race because of how good he was playing in that role. So I think you really could get some good trade equity for Darius Garland. Like, I really think that a wing is really missed on this team. I floated this in the offseason. I think a swap for Darius Garland for Brandon Ingram would have been sweet for the Cavs. Obviously, that's off the table now because they got DeJounte Murray. They don't need Darius Garland. But that, for me, would kind of be the thing looking forward for the Cavs is I would move Garland for a wing. You already have your 2 big men set with Mobley and Allen. I think Donovan is more than capable of running the point guard position. So you just don't really need 2 guards that have very similar play styles. So that's kind of my thing with the Cavs. They're a good team, but this is their ceiling. They're going to be what they've been the past couple of years as long as they don't make any moves. But, the Cavs, I do kind of hold a bit of a special interest in them because I've gone to a couple Cavs games. I've been out to Cleveland to see them play, and Donovan Mitchell is completely electrifying. I'll never forget, first NBA game I ever went to was in the 2023 season, I think it was. It was Donovan's first year in Cleveland. He was incredible. He had a 4-point play. He hit a massive, 360 dunk. He was awesome. So I do like the Cavs, but like I said, that's kind of where they are right now. Number 4, I have the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't really know what to do with the Bucks. I made a video about them in the offseason. They just had one of the strangest seasons. To start off the year, I can't remember exactly what their record was. Weren't they 30-12 or something like that under Adrian Griffin? And then they fire him. They bring in Doc, and they were actually a little under 500 under Doc Rivers. And the fit between Giannis and Dame just did not feel right. Even though they got off to a good start, they were winning a lot of games. They looked like a good team, but the connection between Dame and Giannis just felt off. It felt like they never were really able to hammer that down. Then they lost in the first round because Giannis wasn't going to play regardless in the first round. And then Dame got hurt in the first round, so they lost to the Pacers in the first round. I just don't know what to do with this Bucks team. It's weird to me because the Bucks for years and years and years were year in, year out a true title contender. And for me, I feel like their window is starting to close. And I think you can make a legit argument that the Damian Lillard trade was a big-time mistake because they didn't have really any chemistry. They were just a weird team last year, and Drew Holiday's hoisting another Larry O'Brien with a different team. So I just don't know. If you swap out Dame for Drew right now, I would feel a little more confident about this team because you at least knew Drew fit with this team. You won a title with Drew Holiday. So Giannis, to me, is still incredible. I still think, if you go back and look at last year's numbers from Giannis when he was playing, they were still MVP level numbers, but I feel like there might be some voter fatigue with Giannis because he's already went back-to-back. But it's kind of weird to say that because Jokic went back-to-back and they gave him another MVP. So he's definitely a guy who's going to be in the MVP race. I just don't know how I feel about them in terms of their ceiling because the fit with Dame's weird. Doc Rivers is just objectively a bad NBA head coach, and you just gave him a 6-year contract to be the coach of this team. They feel like a mess. And if they have another disappointing year, what do you do with this Bucks team? Giannis has even started to hint that he might be interested in leaving, which we heard rumblings about before they won the title. And I thought once they won the title, okay, he's going to be a Buck for life. There's no way he leaves. But with how weird last year was, with how terribly managed this team was and how bad the coaching was and how weird the fit was with Dame, it wouldn't be too big of a surprise if Giannis just went to another team. I really wouldn't be that surprised with how player movement is in this era. Number 3, another really frustrating team, especially a team that I like, is the Philadelphia 76ers. I still don't buy them as a title contender. I don't, because how could you at this point in time? How could you realistically think the Sixers are a title contending team, even though they added Paul George? I think that's really going to help. It should help them make a deeper playoff run, but Embiid is my second favorite player in basketball right now, and I can't trust him. I think it's definitely overstated how people say he's a bad playoff performer. He's not a bad playoff performer. it's because of the injuries. It's the fact that he's not there is why they really struggle, And then last year, of course, he was gone for such a large part of the regular season, which dropped them down to the 7th seed. They had to play the Knicks in the first round. The Knicks are just a far more talented overall team than the Sixers, so they crushed Philly. So yeah, for me, they're so frustrating. I'm sad that I have to cheer for them because Embiid is my guy. But I will be, of course, rooting for them. We just got the news today that Paul George and Joel Embiid will not be playing tomorrow in the opening game. Of course. I mean, what a great way to encapsulate the Sixers with them starting off in prime time, the first game of the season. Paul George and Embiid aren't playing. That just perfectly encapsulates the Sixers team. So I like them a lot on paper. I like Paul George. I like Maxey. I like Embiid. I like some of the other players on this team, but how can you trust this team? The only reason I'm putting them at 3 is because when Embiid is healthy, we know that he can threaten to be the best player in the league. It's just the injuries are so detrimental to this team. But I believe in Maxey. Paul George, when he plays, is still one of the most versatile players in the league. So when they're healthy, they're going to be really good. It's just, for me, I can't quite put them into that upper echelon in terms of a contending team because I don't trust their health, particularly with Embiid and Paul George. Number 2, I have the New York Knicks. You could argue that this is the most stacked team in the NBA right now. Just from a roster perspective, this team is completely loaded with talent. To me, they fleeced the Timberwolves in getting Karl-Anthony Towns. You have Jalen Brunson right now, who's arguably a top 10 player in basketball. You got Mikal Bridges, who was incredible with the Suns and was, still putting up numbers with the Nets, even though they weren't a very good team. He still had good individual numbers. You got him now. You got OG Anunoby. You got Josh Hart. You got Karl-Anthony Towns. You got Miles McBride. You got a really good head coach in Tom Thibodeau. There's just a lot to like about this team. They're stacked right now. And a big problem with them last year is they kind of ran out of steam. Obviously, the injuries didn't help. But in certain spots, they also were missing that true number 2 creator outside of Brunson. Well, now you've added Mikal Bridges, we've seen with the Nets that he can kind of lead a team in certain spots. So you got him, and you got Cat. Cat was really, really good for the T-Wolves in the playoffs last year. That's a massive addition, and it also provides them some versatility with their lineups as well, whether they want to go more big or they want to go small ball. Cat really brings a lot of versatility to this basketball team, and then Jalen Brunson, like we said, is another guy to definitely watch for MVP. I mean, he is just incredible. He's on the best value contract in the NBA right now. They better build him a statue for how much money he left on the table to stay with the New York Knicks. I think he left over $100 million on the table to stay there. I think there's not very many players in any sport that would be willing to do that. So Brunson, team first guy. Everything, he just loves how this team is set up in terms of the players there, the coaching. So I don't blame him for wanting to stay, but that is such a selfless move there to take that little of a pay cut so they could bring in a guy like Karl-Anthony Towns and bring in a guy like Mikal Bridges and pay OG Anunoby and keep Josh Hart. This team is just so loaded. Can't wait to see them in the playoffs. Number 1, of course, we have the reigning NBA champion Boston Celtics. I really, really hope we get a fully healthy Knicks team versus a fully healthy Celtics team in the playoffs because that's going to be an incredible matchup. And I think you can maybe even argue that the Knicks have the better starting 5. But how could you not say it's the Celtics after what they just did? They were the most dominant regular season team. I'm trying to think of their playoff dominance as well. Who did they even play in the first round? Oh, it was the Heat. They lost a game there. I think they lost a game to Cleveland maybe, and then they swept the Pacers, and then they beat the Mavs in 5. So it was such a dominant, brutal, dominating performance. They were just clearly head and shoulders above the NBA this past year. They had the best starting 5 by far. And I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. I think it's the best starting 5 since the Kevin Durant Warriors. We've had other good starting 5s, like that Denver Nuggets team that won in 2023. But for me, the versatility and particularly the defensive impact that those guys together, there's a reason why they just won the title, because it's a very, very successful recipe. Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis. That is just kind of a cheat code. It's unfair. And I think it'd be very fair to say that they could pretty easily go back-to-back because it's not like Tatum was even that great in the finals. Like, Tatum was fine. I think people give Tatum a lot of hate. I don't really get why Tatum's now becoming, like, one of the more hated players in the league. I think it's because early on, like, he had the upside of being, like, a top 3 player, and I think he's a lot closer now to 10 than he is to 3. So maybe that's kind of why some people hate on him, is maybe he didn't, like, pan out as highly as he is, but he's still such an incredible player. Like, he was the best player on a championship team. I know he didn't win finals MVP, but he's the most important player on the Celtics. Jaylen Brown was really good. Of course, he won finals MVP. And, you know, it just never made sense to me, all the talk about potentially splitting them up. Like, they're still really young. They have an incredible supporting cast. They're going to be good for a really long time. So that has been me doing all the seedings of every team in the NBA. So I know we're definitely well over an hour here. Not quite the longest video I've ever done on the channel. I did do like a Steelers schedule breakdown that was like an hour and a half. I don't think we're quite there in this one, but definitely a really long video. Doubt there's anyone still listening to this monstrosity. But if you did, you know, you're a real trooper. Really appreciate it. Definitely let me know down in the comments some of your like bold takes for the upcoming NBA season. Yeah, just thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.